Welcome to Ask the FM Doctor, an interactive web series brought to you by the Simplar Foundation and IFMA to help you navigate the complex and ever-changing world of facility management. Whether you're a seasoned professional or a newcomer to the field, you'll find valuable insights and tips to deliver a better experience for your stakeholders while saving money. Join us on the third Tuesday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern U.S. time to learn from our FM docs while connecting with other facility managers from around the world. Register today at simplerfoundation.org/FM-doctor so you don't miss an upcoming session.
Over to Mr. Jeff Sawyer, the one and only. And Jeff, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jake. So as Jake said, please, if you have any questions, just call me Jeff. Mr. Sawyer was my dad. And so I have an extensive background. I grew up in the construction business, a lot of TIs, commercial, residential, that sort of thing. And at one point worked for a city as a capital projects engineer. So had a lot of facility work, had my own construction company. And when I sold my construction company, I had the pleasure and sometimes displeasure of being a CFO of a boarding school. And the school was 300 acres. It had 80 buildings that everything from an 1800s pole barn that had been turned into a theater to 1970s buildings with dormitories and libraries and all kinds of crazy things. And so when Jake and I were talking about this, we thought, well, you know, it might be interesting to understand somebody that understands a little bit about facilities, which I certainly do from a construction perspective and an operational perspective, and the idea of a mission especially of a nonprofit and of a school in particular. So some of the challenges is important with especially nonprofits is the folks that are working in the nonprofits, whether they be teachers or administrators. The mission is super, super important. So they're very focused on their piece of the mission, providing that service to that individual, that student, whoever it might be. And as FMs, one of the things I've learned really early on is that we have to prioritize, especially in that space, how we get our work done that meets the mission, but also meets the financial part of that mission. And a big piece of that is actually the collaboration between the operational folks, the FMs, the CFOs, and the educational leaders. So we're going to walk through that. We'll close with Q&A and the like. So as I started to say, I'm a little bit ahead of myself, but those folks in these highly mission-driven organizations, which I'm sure many of you have been involved in, they can't see past oftentimes their own office doors. So they don't understand that maybe there's constraints, maybe there's challenges, whether it be financial or structural, if you will, in the facilities, and how we work with each other in those areas and how we have to communicate better to balance the needs of the individuals with the needs of the overall nonprofit mission is super, super important. Within a educational institute, certainly the teaching of the students, the safety of the students, the safety of the staff are critical. But one of the things, especially in a nonprofit arena, that revenue source, whether it be donations from past students, from directors, boards of directors and the like, or it's actually attracting new students that in the case of a boarding school could be quite pricey. Back in 2010, a full pay for a boarding student at our school was almost $40,000. So almost the value, the same as a university annual cost. But there's a lot of competing interests in that. And that's really everything that we do, and I'm sure you guys see it in whatever work you're doing, is the revenue and expense side, is how do we not overspend and how do our facilities actually attract more revenue in some cases. And the other thing is that if you think about it, in our space is, especially in that space, is that our facilities are marketing tools. They're marketing tools for new students in that case, or for people that want to help fund our mission. And so understanding that, I certainly didn't have that walking in, because I was very numbers driven, but also facility safety driven, and how the safety looks. I mean, how the facilities look. And I had a lot of challenges with the facilities team initially, because they knew the significant structural challenges they were having. And I mean physically structurally and softly structurally, but they didn't understand the financial piece of the business that I had walked into. And literally, the organization should have been closed. It was totally underwater. When I started, I didn't think it could be saved. We were able to save it, and it does still exist, which still surprises me. But from when you start balancing those perspectives between the CFO and you start teaching each other what the real needs are and understand how you communicate, really starts to be critical to the success of both the mission as an FM and the mission of the overall organization. So again, balancing the here and now. The interesting thing is that what I started when I was dealing with the facility guys, whether they be the grounds or the janitorial or whatever it was, is that trying to get them to step back and look at the bigger picture. And I think as leaders of FM, I think we need to do that in any organization, but I think more so specifically in organizations that are maybe having financial difficulties, are old, and money has not been spent on facilities like it should have been, or is just seriously mission driven, where they think about one thing, or one group thinks about one thing, and they can't see the bigger picture. So that's, I think, the biggest challenges we have is communicating, and also teaching our teams, or leading our teams, to understand better. So when Jake and I were discussing this talk, he starts pulling stories out of me, and a great example, this facility, again, 300 plus acres in the middle of the desert, was like an oasis, lots of big cottonwood trees, but they were aging out. So you're starting to lose these 80, 90-year-old trees that were just massive. And so we lost a couple, had to clear them, did it ourselves because we really couldn't afford to bring in tree experts. And so we had these stumps. The FMs, the stumps don't look good to anybody, especially in the middle of a nice, beautiful grass. And the FMs were focused on the stumps because that's all they could see, because they'd cut down the tree. What they couldn't see is that behind those trees, there was hiding buildings that hadn't been painted, that were flaking, that when you walked into the building, they were just absolutely terrible. And any parent walking in there to spend $40,000 a year for their student to go there would say, wow, they can't even paint the buildings. But the FMs were focused on the stump. So how we have to talk about that, and how we have to be careful about how we spend our money, is a critical communication tool that, frankly, in my world, in my experience, CFOs can't even think past. So I think FMs are in an amazing position to start that communication process with CFOs. Another great example was they had a swimming pool, not a lot of swimming pools in the middle of the desert. Had been there for years, but it had a block wall around it. You couldn't see it when you went on a facility tour. And so my facility people were still pushing me to spend $5,000 to grind a stump out. I said, hey, why don't we tear down 20 foot of block wall and put a wrought iron fence? That's $5,000 too. Now, when a tour goes by, they can see the pool. And it was a nice pool. So thinking outside the box and trying to communicate that balance between what we know as operators of buildings and what might better fit the mission, we really need to start thinking and training our teams in those kind of fashions. outward appearance has great importance in that space to get donors and the like. But we still have to maintain the safety. So for example, we stopped using a particular building because the cost of making it safe was we just didn't have the money to make it safe. The facility guys wanted to Band-Aid it, but it was easier to switch those funds to other places that would make other buildings more safe and also provide that outward appearance to be able to grow revenue like we want. So a little thing that when I talk to operations folks about CFOs is most CFOs, their heads in the sand, they're thinking numbers, they're hard to talk to. If you don't have one like that, congratulations. But that doesn't change that we have to work with them on a day-to-day basis. And so I think one of the things that you need to think about in the facility space and in trying to communicate actual needs is to talk about the mission, because everybody else is. The teachers, the administrators, they're talking about this or that about the mission. And FMs, we kind of forget about that. So we need to talk about the mission. We need to communicate, around how the facilities are going to help that. And we shouldn't try to hide from the CFOs. And because CFOs like everything on straight lines, they would rather spend $1 a month for 100 months, than $100 today. So how do we start thinking in terms of how we're going to communicate within their parameters? Because typically, again, those, I'll call them bean counters, no offense to anybody that's on the phone. I certainly am one, I guess. Is the bean counters in us can't change and adapt as easily as operations folks can, because we can balance the money and the need and stuff. So we really need to start thinking about being salesmen, especially in the nonprofit space. So again, advisor, how we think about that, how we provide the options, but also at the same time is that one of my recommendations is not to let them make all the decisions. You have to make the case based on what you know is best. Because if you give a person that doesn't know 2 options, they may choose wrong. So giving options is good, but you really need to make the case so you're driving them to the best option to let them make the decision that they are best able to make. And obviously life cycle costing and all those things that we do in the facility space is super important. And sometimes being able to give up a building like I did may be what you need to do, or give up something. It's unfortunate, it doesn't feel good, but that might be a choice if times are tough. So again, is that we can add a lot of value, and it's amazing how the facility people know the students, the faculty, way better oftentimes than even administrators. I had landscape folks that knew every student's name, a couple hundred students, they knew every student's name. We all lived on campus, so we were all part of the same community, but they were able to do a lot of things in that space. And so in certain spaces, we need to be able to step out of our roles that are driven by our job contract, if you will, and be able to be part of that community, and then use our data and our information about who and what we know to help drive processes. So the other thing that I always would tell my teams is that, whether you wear a tie or you wear work boots, it's the same. Just some days you have to wear clean work boots instead of dirty ones if you're walking into a bunch of guys with ties on. But that's okay, because you have that important position and you have an important skill set to be able to talk about not only the facility, the mission, a chemistry lab, whatever that might be. Just say. So I think that we also, one of the things that I think a lot of leaders in FM, that we're all very technical. I can plumb, I can do electrical work, but a lot of times we don't always bring in information from some of our younger teams, some of our folks that are maybe siloed, the janitor, the grounds folks, of how do we get information from them that we can also share with our CFOs and our administrators. Make them part of, not only make them part of the team, but also is get that information we don't know. We literally had some facility people that once we create an atmosphere where they could talk to folks with ties. It was a cowboy school, so nobody wore ties. Don't get past that. But one of them actually saw a student in distress and was able to notify somebody that said, they didn't say hi to me. I've seen this going on a couple of days, and that could have ended up very bad for that student. And so I think that's a big part of the balance that FM can help with administration and with the overall running of a nonprofit mission. So we talked about, balancing missions and goals, better collaboration, financial ideas. I know we've had other talks with the FM doctor.
Okay.
Hello? We've had other talks with the FM doctors about, flatlining planning and expenditures and all of those things. I think the keys that if any of you guys are working or plan to work in that nonprofit, highly driven mission space, is to become part of that thought process, be involved in the mission, and be very communicative the best you can with your admin, especially your CFOs.
Thank you for joining us for today's session of Ask the FM Doctor. Be sure to mark your calendars now and join our next webinar at 12 p.m. Central Time on the third Tuesday of the month. We look forward to seeing you again.